right, thank you, Bobby. Welcome, everyone. Whenever I'm preparing for Quickbooks training, it's always really difficult to know kind of who my audience is, what their level of experience is, or how they're currently utilizing QuickBooks within their company or conservation district. And so this tutorial today is just going to give some real basic highlights on the software, some resources, some really great resources to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on your own should you have questions. And then, like Bobby said, as we move along and we talk about kind of the different aspects of the software, you're welcome to raise your hand and answer questions. And then anything that I can't answer today, I can certainly help research for you if it's a unique situation and pass on additional resources, kind of for some of those situations. So as Bobby said, my name is Gretchen. I've been with the Mancos Conservation District now a little over 6 years. But my background actually is in finance and fiscal management. I have over 7 years in QuickBooks and now close to 30 years in Peachtree Sage 50 software for accounting and bookkeeping. But it still doesn't mean I also don't have something to learn. And my slides aren't moving now, Bobby. They were moving before, I'm not sure what shifted.
Well,
Let's see.
hold on just a second.
Okay.
Gretchen, when you screen shared, did you screen share your entire screen or just a window?
The entire screen, and then I did toggle and test it before, and it was toggling, so I'm not sure why now it's not moving.
Perfect. I did the opposite earlier and couldn't get it to move, so it was worth an ask.
Okay, do you want me to stop share and try sharing again?
Yeah, let's try that. Okay. Is it allowing you now, Gretchen, or no?
Okay, are you seeing the second slide?
It says slide 2 of 15.
All right. So one of the first things that I try to let conservation districts, know or think about, what does your board of supervisors or your grantors, if you're looking at going for grant dollars for projects, want to know from your financials? What you enter into QuickBooks not only is kind of the fiscal management of your organization, but it's also the best way to communicate back to your board of directors or to your grantors kind of what your financial picture is and how you have tracked funding that you've received. So those are great questions. One of the things that my board loves to see is a monthly budget, the budget that they approved annually versus the actual. Balance sheets are great for talking about your financial picture and where your bank balances are and your liabilities. Those types of information that board of supervisors and specifically your treasurer should be looking at and overseeing for your conservation district. A well planned out balance sheet and profit and loss is really great for grantors to see as well. It really shows that you have confidence in the information that you are giving them on your financial picture, and that you're capable of tracking dollars that they are really entrusting to you. What does your accountant need to know for your exemption from audit? This is really important depending on which portion of the exemption of audit you fit in, whether it's the one that your treasurer can perform, one that needs to be done by an outside accountant, or one that needs to be taken to an official state audit based on your revenues and your expenditures for the year. And so those are just really important questions to kind of ask yourself as you're thinking about how am I going to be tracking information within the software. And then the last question, what information do I need to gather to get started? So what previous information, if you have not used an accounting software, do you need to have on hand in order to get started to build out a brand new company in the software? A couple of really, really helpful YouTube channels that I have even utilized in the past is simonsaysit.com and QuickBooks Made Easy. Now, a couple cautions with these two YouTube channels. Simon Says It is for-profit companies and will give a lot of different helps and logistics for a for-profit corporation. QuickBooks Made Easy is really formulated for nonprofits, so 501c3s typically. And so as you are looking at some of these YouTube channels and some of the aspects that they can really help you with in utilizing the software, it's really important to remember that conservation districts are not for-profit corporations, and they are also not a nonprofit 501c3. And so you always want to make sure that you're checking kind of state statute requirements for conservation districts, filing requirements for conservation districts as you're looking at some of these helpful YouTube tools. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't have a subscription for conservation districts in QuickBooks. And so these are kind of the two best solutions that I've found. Really, really super easy to plug in the activity or the action that you would like to perform in the software. And you can just watch a video, usually step by step, in how to perform that within the software. So getting started. Typically getting started with QuickBooks, it's great to decide on a starting date. A lot of times you can't pick the first day of your fiscal year, but that's certainly one that I recommend. It's really easy to start out that way. And then you have that first fiscal year of financials ready to go for your accountant. That specific date on getting started really is going to mark the beginning of your use of QuickBooks. And so you really want to think of it as your go live date. This is the date that I'm committing to really look at my financial picture for my conservation district from here forward, is kind of that go live date. And then you want to gather your financial information. That financial information does depend on the start date that you choose, but should include a lot of the following. Your bank account balances or statements that go back to your start date. Any kind of assets that you might have. So that could be building, that could be equipment, any kind of asset that you want to have on that balance sheet to show your financial picture. Any liability balances. So are you currently running payroll? Do you have any kind of short-term loan, debt, a credit card, any kind of balances like that that you would want to have on your balance sheet? And then you'll have those net asset balances to move forward. And then you want to gather any kind of project or program information specifically to funding and expenditures that you may want to track individually. The next step is going to be creating your company file. You can either use the Easy Step interview or you can create a company file manually. The one thing to caution, QuickBooks does not currently have a click button for a conservation district or special district. So as you're choosing to set up that company file, you will need to choose other, and then QuickBooks will build it out, but it won't be perfectly set for a conservation district. They just don't have that kind of formula built into the software. You can also update an existing company file, or you can choose to restore and update a backup file if someone previously has utilized QuickBooks for your conservation district. The next step will be looking and understanding how to set up your chart of accounts. Understanding QuickBooks accounting and sorting. This is one area where I really recommend, if you're starting to really look at setting up your chart of accounts, you utilize some of those YouTube videos that talk about different aspects of it. There's really not a right or wrong way to set up chart accounts as far as naming them, numbering them, but you want to make sure that they're very usable and they're very clear in your reporting back to your board of supervisors and to any kind of grantors that you might be sending financials to. You'll look at creating those accounts. You can utilize sub-accounts. You can go into manipulating those accounts and really working with them to really create the reporting that you need to communicate that financial picture to your board of directors. And then you'll go into entering your opening balances. And those are some of those liability and balance sheet and asset numbers that we talked about previously. Then you'll look at configuring your preferences. This is another place that I really recommend watching some of those YouTube videos on what the software can do for you. You want to enable the features you need, but you may want to remove some features that are just not relevant to your conservation district to kind of clear up some of the clutter of what the software can offer. And then you're going to be looking at configuring the way that QuickBooks works for you. Again, these YouTube videos, there's so much within the software. The YouTube videos really will help you understand how to configure your software and your company in order to, again, report back to your board of supervisors or your grantors that financial picture that you really want them to understand where you're at. Configuring classes and lists is another really great tool within QuickBooks. The way that I have been trained in setting up QuickBooks for conservation districts, specifically to grant tracking and retail sales, is using classes to track programs and projects, and then setting up customer lists for our retail sales and sales tax, and using the customer job feature for grant tracking. The reason that this is kind of the best way to set up the software for grant tracking, when you utilize classes for a program or a project, it collects all of the information that you assign to that class, and you can provide one report on that particular program or project to your board of directors or back to the grantor. A great example of this would be the DCT program. If the DCT program is a class, then as I assign payroll or expenses to the DCT program, it collects it within that class. Setting it up as a customer job, I set up the CSCB 2021 DCT job under my customer. And so the funding that comes in from CSCB for a district conservation technician gets classed as a program, and it gets categorized as a customer job for grant tracking. The other customer job that I set up for the DCT program is the secondary revenue for our match, our 20 to 25% match for the DCT program. So when I provide a class report for my board of directors, it shows 100% of what that DCT cost the conservation district for the year, but I can also separate out the customer job, and I can see the 80% that's covered by CSCB and the 20% that's covered by another revenue source in order to accurately report back for reimbursements. So managing types of revenue, this is very different by conservation district, and whether you have a robust sales program or you have mostly grant funding, or you're working on a lot of volunteer hours and direct assistance. So some of the types of revenue we talked about that can be managed through that customer job. It really helps you to separate out the types of revenue, the individual grants, and keep all of your expenditures categorized in the back end of the software for reporting. Setting up your accounts receivable is another really important role within the software. Some companies choose to set up an accounts receivable, which is creating your invoicing, receiving invoices, and then making bank deposits. And then you can report on those receivables. Part of the importance of setting up this system, most exemptions from audit are run on what's called a modified accrual basis. And so your accountant in doing your exemption from audit is going to not only look at your cash revenue, but any kind of grants that were secured within that year that maybe the funding is going to be reimbursed in subsequent years. And so they really want to see those invoices created for those grants that are awarded, and then the reimbursements are received against that invoice as you receive those reimbursements. Managing expenses is handled kind of in the same way, although most districts need to choose within QuickBooks whether you want to provide reporting on the accrual versus the cash basis. This is an area where the software can be confusing for users that haven't necessarily used it in the past. In simplified terms, the accrual basis is what you have secured as far as income and expenses through invoicing and billing, but it may not have actually hit your bank account. So it's projecting into the future revenue and expenses. On the cash basis, it is only the actual amount that has come through your bank account. So that is actual deposits and actual expenses or checks that have cleared and gone out. And so it's very important to kind of understand the difference and set up your accounting for what you would like your story to tell, what you would like your financial picture to look like, and make sure that as you are reporting back to your board of supervisors or to a grantor, that understanding is there, whether it is on the accrual basis or whether it's on a cash basis. If you decide to work on the accrual basis, it will be very, very important to enter invoices and entering bills, even for future payment. It takes a little bit of extra work in the background of the software. It can provide some additional reporting, but definitely takes extra time and extra diligence to make sure that you're utilizing those portions of the software and not just writing a check for an outstanding bill without booking it against the bill. And then you want to, again, on the managing expenses side, utilize those customer job and those class assignments that you've given to your programs and projects and your grants to make sure that you are allocating those expenses to the correct program and to the correct grant. QuickBooks can be really great for payroll and for employees, but there are some nuances within the software that can be challenging for conservation districts. As far as entering employees, payroll items, payroll setup, and including direct deposit, most YouTube videos are highly helpful in these areas. And then also with paying liabilities, QuickBooks can work really well for that as well. Instead of utilizing a payroll service, the software can really save you a lot of money in having an employee manage your payroll for you within the software. Some of the nuances for conservation districts within the payroll software, the Colorado unemployment payroll liability will not allow you to charge the rate year long. So in the state of Colorado, conservation districts do not meet normal Colorado unemployment rules. And so there are some background tricks in there. Once the software says that your employee has met the salary cap for unemployment, conservation districts are required to continue to collect that liability. And so that's kind of one of those nuances within the software that doesn't really work for conservation districts, but I have figured out kind of workarounds for that. The other payroll liability, some conservation districts have been exempted from federal unemployment and some have not. And so if you're looking at setting up a brand new employee or you're looking at setting up payroll for the first time, you really want to check and see if you've received your exemption from the IRS or whether you're still subject to pay federal unemployment. QuickBooks is great for managing bank accounts and even petty cash. You can transfer funds between accounts. It helps to handle bounce checks if you have issues with that with some of maybe your sales that you do. You can void checks easily, and it will help you to make those journal entries so that your accounts are correct for your accountant for the current year. It will help you reconcile your bank accounts and make sure that what you have in QuickBooks matches identically to your bank statements. One of the things that I do every month when I reconcile our bank accounts is I print the reconciliation report, I print our bank statement, and all of that goes before our treasurer with an accountability form. And our treasurer is able to look at both our QuickBooks and our bank statement and match everything penny to penny. It also helps managing bank accounts with commingled funds. This is where when you have one bank account or two bank accounts, but you may be running multiple grants or money from your county, direct assistance, some of those things that you may want to track individually, but they are mingled in a bank account. Again, going back to that class system and going back to the customer job system for grants or for individual fund accounts will help you manage to the penny what belongs where within your bank account. Again, it can help with tracking petty cash if you have a petty cash drawer for some of your sales. And then it helps in managing all of your expense accounts according to the budget that was approved. Another thing I really like about QuickBooks is entering your annual budget. As my board approves our annual budget in December at the December meeting, it goes before my county commissioners and is approved, and we upload it to DOLA and it's approved. I immediately take that information and I enter it for the following year into QuickBooks. I can do an annual budget, I can do a monthly budget, I can do a lot in there with kind of budgeting throughout the year. I can do a grant budget, so I can do budgets by customer job and track a specific grant budget against kind of what we've received and what we've expensed out throughout the year. It really helps with reporting back to my board of directors every month and the approval of financials as I work with our treasurer. They're able to see the annual budget that they approved for that year and make sure that as they approve expenditures at each meeting that they are staying within that annual budget. Producing reports. QuickBooks has a plethora of reports, probably a lot of them, even for the conservation district, I don't utilize. But some of them that I do are definitely reporting for grants and then reporting on specific programs or projects, presenting on the kind of the financial position of our conservation district. I do use a lot of accounts receivable reports and looking at what we've invoiced and what might be outstanding. And then accounts payable reports are for those accrual-based bill portion of the software. And so if you use the bill creation and the bill payment section of QuickBooks, then you can use the accounts payable reports. If you utilize the check pay function within the software for paying your expenses, then it won't show up in an accounts payable report. And so within the software, you have to kind of go through those processes in order to be able to produce those reports. All right, that's a very quick overview. I didn't see that Bobby had any hands up, but I would be happy to answer questions or go into more detail on kind of any of these areas of the software.
Is anyone have any questions for Gretchen? If you do, please raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute. Gretchen, do you want to touch base again on the best sources for to maybe if they need to dig in further?
Sure, I can go back to that slide with the YouTube links. I'm also happy to share this. So simonsaysit.com is a great YouTube channel, and it's for profit. So it's mostly for-profit businesses. What I find really helpful with this site is conservation supplies or tree sales, because they're going to have more kind of for-profit sales tax information and how to set up inventory if you want to set up inventory. They're going to have how to build out your customer and your invoicing and receive against an invoice for sales. How to track if you end up putting your customers' information into QuickBooks, you can export that to Excel and utilize your customer list for email listservs and just all kinds of kind of really great ways to kind of cross-pollinate with other softwares and manage your business in a sense. So for profit. It also has a lot of really great information on payroll and setting up payroll and employees and kind of on the for-profit side. And then I would say QuickBooks Made Easy is specifically for nonprofits, but those that YouTube channel and some of those webinars really get more into setting up the class and the customer job system for grant tracking and how to really pull the reports that you want to see or the reports that you need to see. How to make sure you get that information in the software correctly in order to be able to pull those useful reports. And so they just have some really, really great tutorials. They're not terribly long, but they're really super easy to kind of pause and do step by step and kind of utilize a combination of them. Again, just be aware that conservation districts aren't for-profits and they're not nonprofits. And so there may be some nuances in there, you know, that might not agree with kind of your tax base or your tax filing or your accountant or tax professional.
Okay, great. I see that Mitch has a question. Mitch, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Gretchen. Kind of along this same line. So we have QuickBooks and we use it. Is there a manual or anything within QuickBooks where you can look up, you know, I need to do this particular function, and you can go and, you know, it has a glossary or something and kind of tutorials within QuickBooks, or does everything have to be outside on YouTube or something else?
It's going to depend on your subscription. So QuickBooks Online, I believe some of the base subscriptions with QuickBooks Online comes with a free helpline. The QuickBooks Desktop comes with some limited help. And then I know you can pay like a $35 monthly fee-ish to get additional help from a QuickBooks professional. And so it's really going to depend on which part of QuickBooks or which software you're using and kind of what kind of assistance or help is offered with that. There's always a help button in the software and you can click on that and usually, you know, it will kind of guide you in kind of the help that you've paid for, whether that's chat, phone call, that sort of thing. But I'm going to say a lot of the QuickBooks help is going to help you with issues you may be having with the software. They may not be able to help you set up your company or specifically utilize it, you know, for your purposes. That's not really what the QuickBooks helpline is kind of set up for. It's more software issues. I will also say one of the books that kind of helped me when I first started with the conservation district, it's a book by Ivans, and it's called Quickbooks in Nonprofits. It's the 2nd edition. It's a great book that takes you through kind of the menus of QuickBook Desktop and what's all available and how it best. Again, it's for nonprofits. And so you have to just kind of read through it carefully, knowing that conservation districts aren't nonprofits, and so some of it doesn't apply.
Okay, great, Gretchen. Do we have any more questions for Gretchen? Or any comments, anything that anyone would like to share with their experiences with QuickBooks? Is there anybody here that does QuickBooks Online besides me? Is there
Yeah,
anyone on here dumb enough?
We use QuickBooks Online.
What?
At Jefferson County, we use QuickBooks Online.
Do you?
Yeah.
How long have you been using that?
Well, the organization has about 3.5 years. I've only been here about 2.5 years.
Okay.
But we have an accountant on retainer that helps when we have problems. So
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
that's the
say,
saving grace.
yeah.
Oh. Looks like we have another question here from Vanessa. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good morning. I don't really have a question, and thank you for all that, Gretchen. It's good to reinforce some of the things I've been learning. And I just wanted to say that my saving grace over the past 6 months has been working with a bookkeeper, as that's not exactly my expertise, and a lot of struggling through QuickBooks and doing things wrong and inefficiently has really turned around with the help of a bookkeeper who doesn't charge us that much. So it's been great to have her assistance in getting things set up in all those nice ways that Gretchen mentioned that, make sense to the boards and everyone else. So that's my suggestion, is work with someone who knows what they're doing.
It does really help to work with someone that understands, when you plug in certain information, where it goes and where it can be accessed, and and just kind of walking through those portions of the software can be so helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have one of those people, and I've experienced the same thing when you call in on quick with the help desk. It's definitely more on the technical end of it, and sometimes it's kind of frustrating. Even when they help you with that, it might go wrong.
Yeah.
I see that Laura has a question. So Laura, or question or comment?
Yeah, hi. I'm about 6 months into being the new district manager now, and I think the board has kind of agreed to include me in the budget process and help build a bigger plan, if you will, rather than just kind of our annual budget. So we are looking at QuickBooks Online. I guess I was just kind of curious, if there's any recommendations for how to not necessarily transfer the budget into my hands, but kind of work with my treasurer in a mutual relationship through QuickBooks Online, and if there's a recommended plan that you guys would suggest. I see there's lots of plan options.
I think it depends on what your conservation district is currently doing as far as projects and programs, and then what your future aspirations are, as far as projects and programs. And that's really going to determine what level of software you need. But if you are looking at, grants for projects or programs, and wanting to track individual, kind of portions of funding within a singular or a couple of bank accounts, I definitely recommend the class function and the customer job function, and some of those higher end options within the software, and I wouldn't go too basic. And then another consideration is payroll. If you're currently utilizing a payroll service, or if you'd like to, to do payroll through the conservation district and through your software, QuickBooks has several different levels of kind of payroll services, depending on how much you want to tackle and take on.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
I think my biggest frustration right now with QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop is because we utilize the class function as well, and transferring over to QuickBooks Online as far as tracking, if you're tracking your personnel, if you're tracking your employee time, breaking it out per program, you're going to run into with the payroll, with the personnel function, they only allow right now for you to assign one class to payroll.
Yeah.
So we're looking for a workaround on this end, and I've had QuickBooks help me with that a couple times, and the way they did it both times has not worked yet. So if anyone has any suggestions, Mitch, I don't know if you have any suggestions there, but and then I would definitely get an accountant to help with the migration of it versus QuickBooks themselves, if you're going to migrate from desktop to online. And Susie, you might want to mention something on that, or Mitch. I think Laura has her hand. Laura, do you have another question?
No, I just forgot to lower.
Oh, okay.
my hand.
Okay.
I would say so far working in both QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop, desktop definitely has more functions for grant tracking and some of those issues that Bobby mentioned with payroll, but I'll say, QuickBooks Desktop also has an issue with our health insurance portion that the conservation district covers. It goes into the payroll just fine, and it shows on the pay stub, and it tracks it in the liability, and everything's working great, except for the customer job function. So when I assign payroll to a grant, or a portion of payroll to a grant, that particular health insurance that's pulled for the conservation district's liability portion and shows on the pay stub doesn't get assigned to the grant. And so I have to go back monthly and make those adjustments in a journal entry and adjust those per grant, just to make sure that I'm calculating and assigning the correct amount to each grant. And so there are some workarounds that you just kind of have to have if you have that situation.
And then Gretchen, I think, so do you agree with me as far as when anyone's getting set up in a different type, it's better to go through your accountant or your bookkeeper to do that?
Yes, and even plan a budget, you know, for some training and a little bit of assistance in how to utilize what's being set up. Yes, absolutely. And in the end, your exemption from audit should be less. You know, if your information is really clear and easy for your accountant to understand at the end of your fiscal year, you know, then the amount that they charge you for your exemption from audit should be less. You know, than if they've got to kind of sort through your financials to kind of, you know, fully make that report happen. And anything really that you watch, you know, I mean, I've made recommendations for YouTube and some additional help, but always, you know, if you're unsure, consult with a tax professional, and specifically one that's familiar with conservation districts. We've had some issues just in the past with our district with accountants that aren't familiar with conservation districts, and they, you know, they mean well, but there are some nuances in there. And so it's really, really helpful if they're familiar with how we're governed and with our exemption from audit or audit.
Okay. One thing, Gretchen, if you want to share all of those links, I can send those out. When we'll make this recording available for everybody, and I can share those links with the recording here in just a few days.